Southpark was nothing like Wyand's old city. The mountains loomed large and the air felt sharp with cold. And the people were unique. After moving into town just a week ago, she somehow found herself absorbed into the group of 4 boys. Stan, Kyle, Cartman, and the self-proclaimed ladies' man, Kenny. Kenny McCormick. Kenny, with his shaggy blonde hair sticking out of his pakara and his never-ending smirk, had made it his mission to flirt with her in every opportunity. Not that it ever worked. Ryan wasn't easily impressed, especially not by some guy who made innuendos his entire personality. Still, she stuck around the group. They were chaotic, sure, but they made her laugh, and life in a noon town was lonely without friends. On that particular afternoon, the 5 of them had found themselves in another ridiculous adventure. It had started with Cartman convincing everybody to help him track down a, quote, curse, unquote, vending machine. He had claimed he'd eaten his dollar somehow, and the hunt had spiraled into running from mall security guards and sneaking into a janitor's closet and eventually ducking into the shadiest diner Wyan had ever seen. The fluorescent lights buzzed loudly, casting a stickly green glow over the cracking vinyl booths. The air snowed faintly of burnt coffee and regret. "Great choice, Cartman," Kyle's muttered, arms crossed. "Real 5-star establishment." "Shut up, Kyle," Cartman snapped. "We have to hide somewhere, and besides, I'm starving." "Yeah, shocker," Stan said dryly. He flopped into a booth, Kyle sitting across from him. Ryan slid next to Kyle, leaving Kenny to sit across from her. His bright blue eyes lit up in a mischievous way that they always did when he realized he'd be sharing close quarters. "So, Ryan," Kenny started, leaning forward, his elbows on the table. "Since we're basically on a date now, what are you ordering? Something sweet like you?" Ryan rolled her eyes so hard it was a miracle they didn't get stuck back there. "Yeah, Kenny, this isn't exactly how I pictured a dream date. In a diner that probably hasn't seen a health inspection since 1995. "That's what makes it romantic," he shot back with a wink. "Gross," Kyle muttered under his breath, earning a chuckle from Stan. "Can we focus?" Ryan said, pulling a menu towards her. "We're supposed to be hiding out, not turning this into a game of who can annoy me the most." "I'm not annoying," Kenny said, grinning. "I'm charming." "You're something, all right," she replied, flipping to the sticky pages of the menu. The banter continued as they ordered greasy fries, milkshakes, and coffee that tasted sort of more like burnt water. Even Cartman's complaints couldn't ruin the weird atmosphere the group shared. But as the hours dragged on, the security guards most likely gave up and the others started to get restless. "I'm out of here," Cartman announced, stuffing the last bite of his burger into his mouth. "You losers can sit around and do whatever, but I have better things to do," Cartman whined. Kyle rolled his eyes. "You mean like going home and playing video games alone?" "Shut up, Jew," Cartman snapped, before stomping out, Stan trailing behind him with a half-hearted, "See you guys later." That left Ryan and Kenny alone in the booth. "Well, I guess it's just you and me," Kenny said, leaning back with a smirk. "Don't get any ideas. I'm leaving too, sicko," Ryan said, standing up. "I'll walk you home," Kenny offered, sliding out of the booth. "I don't need a chaperone." "I'm not a chaperone. I'm Kenny, but nice try," Kenny said. Ryan groaned, but didn't protest as he followed her out of the door. It was late. The streets were quiet except for the crunch of their footsteps in the snow. "So, Ryan," Kenny started, his hands stuffed into her pockets. "What do you think of Southpark so far?" "It's weird," she admitted slowly. "Weird, good or weird bad?" "Depends on the day," Ryan replied. They walked in silence for a moment. The cold was biting at their cheeks. Despite herself, Wyan appreciated Kenny's persistence. His annoying constant flirting was irritating, but he wasn't a bad guy. There was a certain charm to his shameless confidence, even if she'd never admit it. "Hey," Kenny said suddenly, his tone uncharacteristically serious. "What?" she replied. "Thanks for, hanging out with us. I know we're not exactly normal, but you fit in really well." Mine glanced at him, surprised by the sudden character change. "Is that your way of saying you like having me around?" "Maybe," he grinned. "Or maybe I just like having someone to flirt with who actually talks back." "Don't get used to it," Lion replied. They reached the corner of her street, the warm glow of her house visible in the distance. She stopped, turning to face him. Well, this is me," she said. Kay looked at her, his usual smirk replaced by something softer. Guess I'll see you tomorrow?" "Yeah, probably." For the moment, they just stood there, the cold air swirling around him. Then Kenny took a step back, his grin returning. "Good night, YN." "Good night, Kenny," she replied. She walked up the steps to her house, but she still couldn't help but glance back. He was still standing here, watching her with that dumb, goofy smile. Maybe Southpark wasn't so bad after all. Weeks had passed since Wyan moved to Southpark, and somehow she still hadn't lost her mind. She had the boys to thank for that. Even though they were chaotic enough to make anyone question their sanity, most of all she had Kenny to blame, or thank, depending on the day. True to form, Kenny hadn't let up with the flirting. Whether they were trudging through the snow to chase one of Cartman's ridiculous schemes, hanging out at a bus stop, or grabbing snacks at the convenience store, Kenny was relentless. At first, Wyan had rolled her eyes and dismissed his comments as harmless, but over time that blonde idiot had wormed his way into her good graces. Surprisingly. I mean, sure, he was obnoxious, but he was also kinda sweet when he wanted to be. He always offered her his coat when it was freezing out, made her laugh when she felt homesick, and even managed to keep Cartman from being unbearable, which was a feat in itself. Despite all that, she still had no intention of feeding his big ego. She shot down his advances with a sharp comeback and sarcastic remarks, but lately something had shifted. The banter felt different, like a game. They were both playing, but they weren't ready to acknowledge it yet. And now, here they were. The group had spent most of the afternoon at Stan's house, watching terrible horror movies and arguing over which snacks were superior. One by one, everyone had trickled out until it was only Ryan and Kenny left. Stan's parents were out for the evening across the house. Was unusually quiet. Ryan sat cross-legged on the couch, scrolling through her phone while Kenny lounged next to her, feet propped up on the coffee table. "So," Kenny began, breaking the silence. "What's the plan? Want to make out or something?" Kenny said. Ryan didn't even look up. Wow, Kenny. Real smooth. "Hey, you can't blame a guy for trying," he said, grinning. "Besides, I've been putting in the effort for weeks, and I think I've earned a little reward." She snorted. "You think putting in effort means annoying me nonstop?" "Annoying? I prefer charming," Kenny replied. He shifted closer, his elbow on the back of the couch where he could look at her directly. "Come on, YN. You know you like me. Why else would you keep hanging out with us?" "Because you guys are my friends," she shot back, finally meeting his gaze. Kenny tilted his head, his smirk softening. "Yeah, but I'm your favorite, right?" She rolled her eyes but didn't reply. He wasn't entirely wrong, and that was annoying her even more than his relentless teasing ever did. "Admit it," he pressed, his voice lower now. "You like me, even just a little bit." Ryan stared at him, her heart pounding. She hated how smug he looked. He already knew the answer. Screw it. Before she could even second-guess herself, she yanked the front of his hoodie and crashed their lips against his. For a split second, Kenny froze, clearly not expecting that at all. Then he melted into it. His hands came up to cup her face. It wasn't graceful, far from it. Their noses bumped awkwardly. and their inexperience was obvious, but neither of them seemed to care. When they broke apart, Kenny looked dazed, his cheeks flushed. "Holy crap," he breathed out. "That was amazing." Wyatt laughed, a little breathless herself. "You're so dumb." "And yet, you kissed me anyways?" His grin was impossibly wide. "Does this mean we're like a thing now?" he asked stupidly. Wyatt raised an eyebrow. "Depends. Can you keep your hands to yourself?" Before he could finish, his hands had somehow found the way to her chest. "Seriously, Kenny," she said, smacking his hand away. "Ow! What was that for?" he asked, rubbing his hand. "For being an idiot." "I can't help it," he said, pouting. "You're too irresistible." "Yeah, whatever." She rolled her eyes, but she couldn't help hide the smile that was tugging at her lips. They sat there for a moment, the initial awkwardness fading into something lighter. Kenny leaned against the back of the couch, his usual cocky demeanor replaced by something softer. "So," he said, glancing at Wyan, "does this mean I can stop flirting with you, or—" "Don't push your luck, McCormick." Noted. As the evening went on, they stayed curled up on the couch, eventually going back to Wyan's house instead of just chilling at Stan's, talking and laughing like they always did. Except now it was something different, something that made Wyan's chest feel warm, despite the cold outside. Kenny might have been a shameless flirt, but he was also kind of hers now, and honestly she didn't really mind. The days following Wyan and Kenny's kiss were oddly normal. Well, as normal as things could be in Southpark. Kenny was still his usual self, flirty, cocky, and always finding a way to irritate her. But there was a undeniable shift in their dynamic. Now when Kenny called her beautiful, it made her blush that roll her eyes into her skull. And when he casually threw his arm over her shoulder during their group hangout, she didn't shove him off. Most of the time, she didn't shove him off. But as the snow thickened, the holidays approached, their secret wouldn't stay a secret for much longer. The four boys and Wyan trudged through the knee-deep snow one crisp afternoon, arguing about which sledding hill was the best. Kenny usually, while Cartman and Kyle bickered a few feet ahead. Kenny was walking beside Wyan, leaning closer than he usually did. "You've been smiling a lot lately," Stan said, breaking Wyan's train of thought. She glanced at him. "What's that supposed to mean?" "I don't know," Stan said, shrugging. "It's just weird. I mean, you used to look at Kenny like you wanted to strangle him, and now you look like she wants to kiss me again," Kenny interrupted with a grin. Wyan shot him a sharp look. "Don't push it." Kyle, always the observant one, turned around with the expression that could only be described as suspicious. "Wait, again? What does that mean?" Stan froze mid-step. "Hold on, did you two?" "Oh, gross," Carmen groaned. "Don't tell me you two are dating now." Before Wyan could even reply, Kenny wrapped an arm around her, their shoulders touching, and smirked. What could I say? She couldn't resist the McCormick charm. Wyan shoved him off, her cheeks burning. "Don't make me regret this." "Too late," Kyle sighed, pinching the bridge of his nose. "This is gonna be a goddamn nightmare." Carmen let out a loud, exasperated sigh, as if we already didn't have enough to deal with. "Relax," Wyan said, crossing her arms. "It's not like we're gonna start making out in front of you or something." "Please, don't," Stan said, looking mildly traumatized. Despite the initial teasing, the group eventually let it go. Well, most of them let it go. Cartman made it a point to gag every time Kenny so much as looked at Wyan. But that's just who he is. She had bigger things to worry about, like whether or not she'd actually made the right decision in trusting Kenny with her heart.